Well, thank you for inviting me here, and it's a great honor to be here and to be able to present really very first findings on this topic, the way the Centenary is presented on European and commemorated on European government websites. The Centenary of the First World War is probably one of the first major historical anniversaries to also take place to a very significant degree on the internet. Databases, history portals, and educational projects put at users' fingertips a diverse range of information and resources related to the First World War. In this process, governments are not far behind. This talk looks at the Centenary on official government websites in Germany, Great Britain, and France. It asks how the First World War is narrated and interpreted on these official platforms. I'm particularly interested in the terms of these narratives. Do they remain within the borders of the nation state, or do they envisage the war as a shared experience transcending national boundaries and identities? What importance is attached to the First World War in these countries? Is there a shared tendency in European cultures of memory to move away from national hero worship towards transnational victimization, as has been asserted for Germany? A tendency to remember the war as a transnational community of victims and to speak about it as a learning opportunity with a view to post-national and European perspectives. I will start with Germany. The German government has not developed its own website to commemorate the centenary of the First World War. In Australia, every region has its official website. Yeah? So Germany was also a belligerent country in the First World War, let's put it that way, has no real official website dedicated to the subject. Nonetheless, there is a government website entitled Remembering and Commemoration. The First World War appears under the heading World Wars and Tyranny, Weltkriege und Gewaltherrschaft. Here. Underneath the photo, which refers to the Second World War, okay, this is the wrong direction. Underneath a photo which refers to the Second World War, the following text may be found. I hope you can read it. The First World War, the seminal catastrophe of the 20th century, began in 1914, about 100 years ago. Second sentence. It was followed by the Second World War, instigated by the Nazi regime under Adolf Hitler. 75 years ago, millions of people, soldiers and citizens alike, lost their lives in the two wars, and millions of innocent people were victims of Hitler's racial madness and sent to the Nazi death camps. It is 70 years ago from today, in 2015, that the last survivors of the Auschwitz concentration camp and other camps were liberated by the Allies. Jews from Germany and all over Europe who managed to flee from Nazi Germany helped to found the State of Israel. The establishment of diplomatic relations between Israel and the Federal Republic of Germany 50 years ago is a memorable event. And so on and so forth. I think you can read it. I stop the quotation here. It's obvious the First World War is not remembered as a distinct event, but merely as a prelude to further disasters as the seminal catastrophe of the 20th century that gave rise to the Second World War, the Holocaust, and communist dictatorships in the second sentence. In the second sentence, the focus is already no longer on the First World War, but the Second World War. Hitler's name also appears pretty much straight away. The commemorative year of 2014 is presented in a similar manner. It is not treated separately, but rather mentioned in the same breath as 2015. The memory of the outbreak of the First World War is thus linked to the commemoration of the end of the Second World War and to the reconciliation between Germany and Israel in 1965. The narrative revolves entirely around the victims of war, violence, and dictatorship, soldiers and civilians, men and women. The perpetrators are also mentioned, but again not in reference to the First World War. There's no sense here of heroism or bravery, and the notion of active sacrifice is likewise absent, the notion of sacrifice. Victimhood is dominant. Even under the heading of commemorative events, which is another little property, okay. Gedenkveranstaltungen, which is another subpage. The First World War appears only in the broader context of what the website calls the era of disasters and dictatorship. The remembrance of this era is imparted with a clear political significance. Indeed, one may even speak of a stark instrumentalization of historical remembrance for the project of European integration. I quote, in 2014 and 15, there are many occasions for commemorating the victims of the world wars and the Holocaust. There are also opportunities to think about how important it is that Europe was able to overcome the era of disasters and dictatorships, and how imperative it is to continue to promote a free and democratic Europe and to safeguard its future. Under the headings of Orte des Erinnerns, places of remembrance, mention is only made of the victims of the Second World War and the tyrannies of Nazism and communism. There's no reference to the First World War, even though the picture of the enlarged Pietà created by Käthe Kollwitz in the Neue Wache unter den Linden in Berlin indirectly points to it, because this is Käthe Kollwitz lost a son in the First World War, and it refers to that, the sculpture. This may because the listed museums and memorials sponsored by the federal governments that are linked to from this website do not contain any sites of remembrance for the First World War. In fact, there are very few such sites in Germany. Another subheading referring to historical speeches, I don't know whether I have, no, I don't have it. Another website referring to historical speeches includes documented commemorative speeches by German politicians on the First World War from the period between 1964 to 2009. So the historic commemorations are also historicized themselves. This is a distinctive feature of the German websites. On the whole, the First World War is barely present on the website of the German federal government. Responsibility for the topic has largely been delegated to two organizations, the Federal Archives and the German War Graves Commission, Volksbund Deutsche Kriegsgräberfürsorge, whose special websites on the First World War are linked to from this website. For reasons of time, I will have a look now only, this is the Bundesarchiv, only to the Volksbund website. The website of the German War Graves Commission, dedicated to the First World War, has was commissioned by the federal government and is, in fact, the main official website on the topic in Germany. It provides information on projects from school, educational institution, youth organization, associations, archive, museums, theaters, and so on events, on internet resources, and literature on the First World War. While the focus is on Germany, many of the featured projects and events are inherently binational, above all German and French. The internet resources not only present portals from Germany, but from 10 other countries as well. The contents of the website are available for the most part in English and French, as well as in German. You see the language menu there above. The introductory text of the website resembles the statements that can be found on the German federal government's website. Here too, the First World War is the seminal catastrophe, again, of the 20th century. A reference is then made to the Second World War. Again, the soldiers are cast as victims, and the memory of the Great War is instrumentalized for the European project. The global dimension, moreover, recedes completely into the background. The message here is obvious. If there is any sense to be made at all of the deaths of millions of soldiers, then it is the need for European solidarity. In this seminal, I quote, catastrophe of the 20th century, with its murderous wars of attrition, nearly 10 million soldiers met cruel death, while another 20 million were wounded and physically or mentally scarred for life. Whole areas were devastated, and so on and so forth. Unprecedented mass killing, which the contemporary heroic death propaganda scornfully laughed at. The First World War changed the life of people, societies in country in Europe. The shared memory of this collective nightmare and its causes and effect is therefore an indispensable part of the European integration process. Despite differences in the national memorial cultures, which we look at, the general consensus is that we are now more than a community that has simply been forced together to solve pressing budgetary and economic policy issue. This refers to European Union and is probably a little bit wishful thinking. It is striking that while the website of the German War Graves Commission links to the German and French government websites, it does not do the same with its British counterpart, referring users instead only to the websites of the Imperial War Museum and the National Archive. This may just be a coincidence or an oversight, but perhaps it is due to the significant differences between Germany and Great Britain in the official handling of the First World War. Maybe in the discussion we can say more about this. Martin Bayer knows all about the diplomatic problems which arose between the two countries in 2013 already, when a German government official visited London and tried to tell the British government how the First World War should be commemorated, which was probably not a good idea. The British case. Okay, yeah, this is the links. The British case. The British government website presents much more content than the German websites. It's obvious that the First World War has a far greater importance for the official culture of memory in Great Britain than in Germany. Among the provided documentation, the content mostly concerns commemorative rituals. The sheer number and territorial distribution is impressive. The contents of the British government website are presented in the form of press releases, which announce or report on the commemorations. At the same time, mainly speeches or press releases from government officials are documented. The British website, therefore, appears to be much more official than the German websites. On the British government website, the First World War largely stands on its own. It is rarely associated with the Second World War. Also, nowhere is the conflict characterized as the seminal catastrophe of the 20th century. Only a very small number of press releases refer to other commemorative events, such as the 70th anniversary of the Normandy landing. But even in these texts, no link is usually established between the First and Second World War. The First World War thus remains the Great War, and indeed, unlike in Germany, the First World War on the British website is also much more frequently called the Great War, not just the First World War. The First World War is usually depicted on the British website as a just and therefore meaningful war on behalf of for freedom, fought for freedom and democracy sometimes. As a result, the First World War and the role of Great Britain in it are consistently presented in positive and affirmative terms. Typical in this regard are the words of the Prime Minister at a ceremony in Glasgow to commemorate the country's entry in the war on August 4, 2014. 100 years ago, today, Britain entered the First World War, and we are making that centenary to honor those who served, to remember those who died, and to ensure that the lessons learned live with us forever. It is right to remember the extraordinary sacrifice of a generation, and we are all indebted to them because their most enduring legacy is our liberty. That evening, a memorial service was held at the British Military Cemetery in Mons. Cameron was even more explicit on this occasion about the British entry into the war. We remember the reasons behind the conflict. Too often, it has been dismissed as a pointless war, fought by people who didn't know why they were fighting. But that is wrong. These men signed up to prevent the domination of a continent, to preserve, doesn't say by whom, domination of a continent, to preserve the principles of freedom and sovereignty that we cherish today. Standpoints that deviate from this interpretation of history are not given any space. The Liberal Conservative government clearly lays out its interpretation, which is not without controversy among the public, as you know. The note preceding all the press releases makes this evident. This news article was published under the 2010 to 2015 Conservative Liberal Democratic coalition government. So at least they say what they are, who they are, and what they're doing, so to speak. I do not know whether they were compelled to insert this, or maybe Martin Bayer knows more about this, or whether they did it voluntarily. The German government website, on the other hand, which is supported by a large coalition, reflects the prevailing public view and scholarly consensus on the First World War. It also sets aside topics such as the German responsibility for the outbreak of the war, which may not be hotly contested, but are still controversial. The enormous human costs of the war is by no means glossed over on the British website. Much of the documented events are, in fact, tributes to the fallen, or referring to ceremonies which pay tribute to the fallen. The war dead, however, are not seen as victims. The semantics of the passive victimhood is completely lacking. On the other hand, the semantics of active sacrifice, which implies voluntary action, can be found in almost every pronouncement. I'm saying this active and passive because in German, there's only one word for both, sacrifice and victim, which is Opfer. So in German, what I'm saying is makes much more sense if I read it in German here, because they were saying this is active, this is passive, this is the active sense of Opfer, and this is the passive one. In English and French and Latin and Italian and so on, it's clearly visible. Victim is passive, you are passive. Sacrifice is you die, but it's you want to die, or at least you're voluntarily giving your life. Okay, nearly as ubiquitous as is the language of heroism, bravery, and the devotion to duty. The soldiers of the war are celebrated as heroes whose sacrifice and bravery must not be forgotten. A remarkable number of events are dedicated to the bearers of the Victoria Cross. The language of military heroism is particularly prominent here. During the Centenary, then, the official British rhetoric of remembrance differs little overall from the rhetoric of the First World War itself. It's almost as if the relationship of Western society to war, nation, and military heroism has hardly changed in the last 100 years. A leading German political scientist has referred to Germany as a post-heroic society. This cannot be said, however, of the official culture of commemoration in Great Britain, as it's mirrored on these websites, and probably not for Australia. Sometimes there's also talk of peace on the British government website. The speech of the Prime Minister on August 4 in Mons thus closed with the words, "Here on the continent, we saw not the war to end all wars, but the precursor to another desperate and violent conflict just 2 decades later. We should never fail to cherish the peace between these nations, and never underestimate the patient work it has taken to build that peace." Then again, reference to peace are relatively rare. Even more seldom is the assertion that European integration is the result of the collective learning process that came out of the world wars. A topos which on the German websites is almost a mantra. The British government, on the other hand, tends to use the memory of the First World War to emphasize the positive bilateral relations with individual countries that were also former allies. So it's not so much about Europe, it's about the relationship with several countries, and these countries are a couple of countries. First example is France. On November 11th, 2014, for instance, the defense ministers of France and Britain planted ceramic poppies at the moat of the London Tower, and Michael Fallon, the defense secretary, invoked the allegiance between the two countries. I don't have to read the words, I think you can read them. The Anglo-German friendship is also celebrated from time to time, as when the British ambassador to Belgium spoke at an event in April 2014 to commemorate the soldiers who lost their lives during the British attack on Zeebrugge in April 1918. And this is what he said. Special for me today to be with the German ambassador, my friend Eckhard Kunz, who is here for the first time. Should reinforce what the German ambassador just said, how important it is that we commemorate the First World War together, that in remembering the valor and sacrifice of the past, and as we stood in a cemetery where both British and German soldiers are buried, we remember the losses of both sides. And here also is a reference to Europe, and especially to Western Europe, which is now at peace. But such bilateral commemorations with European partners occur relatively infrequently, in sharp contrast to Germany and, as we will see, and France, which have organized numerous joint projects relating to the First World War. The transnational references of the official British commemoration concern, for the most part, the former colonies, the states of the Commonwealth, above all Australia, New Zealand, and India. A lot of the projects and commemorative events are dedicated to the battles in which troops from the Dominions and other colonies were involved, especially the Battle of Gallipoli. These opportunities are used to highlight the close relationship between Great Britain and the respective countries. The global dimension of the First World War is also vigorously used or co-opted for the integration of immigrants. Emblematic in this regard is the speech held by the conservative politician of Pakistani origin, Sayeda Warsi, who functioned from 2012 to August 2014 as senior minister in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She spoke in June 2014 at the unveiling of a plaque for 175 Victoria Cross recipients from overseas. The politician emphasized the role of the colonies in the British success, or for the British success in the First World War. I'll let you read because I have to drink. We had a workshop the whole day, so I have to apologize. Again, it's the rights and freedom we all enjoy today, and all these overseas people from overseas, not only the Victoria Cross recipients, but all soldiers which went to the arms to fight for Britain, they're all heroes. Yeah. At the end of the speech, these heroes are not only claimed on behalf of the British monarchy for freedom and the Commonwealth, but also the unity of multicultural British society and the equality of Muslims in it, for which the speaker cites her own family history as a case in point. And I think this is remarkable. It would not have been possible for Britain to prevail in the First World War without the massive contribution and sacrifice of countries from the Commonwealth and beyond. That's a repetition. I am proud that both my grandfathers fought in the Bombay Royal Suppers and Miners Regiment in the Second World War. So here's a link to the Second World War, but only because that she's talking about her own family. It is incredible that, like them, men were inspired to fight for a country they had never seen, pledge loyalty to a faraway king for the value of freedom, something they themselves had yet to fully experience. And it goes on talking about the shared history between British and Muslims, and whether you can trace your family's heritage back to the Norman conquest or to a relative who gave his life for Britain a century ago, whether your grandparents came from Nigeria or your parents from Jamaica. This commemoration is relevant to us all, and the message is the idea that that it's wrong to think you cannot be a Muslim and a British at the same time. Great Britain's World War commemoration that seems to be much more global than Germany's, and yet relatively inward-looking, specifically with regard to the former empire and the modern Commonwealth. This is underlined by the fact that the content of the UK government website is available only in English, with the exception of a few pages that are also in Arabic. Why, I don't know. I turn to France, my third example. In France, in preparation for the Centenary, an extensive inter-ministerial staff was formed as early as 2012, the Mission Centenaire 14-18. It was furnished with substantial resources. There's nothing comparable in either the UK or in Germany. As in the UK, The website of the mission is a government portal to the Centenary, which focuses entirely on the commemoration of the First World War. While in Germany, as we have seen, the subject has largely been delegated to the War Graves Commission, which is a semi-official body. It's an association, formally speaking, only partly subsidized by the government, so it's different, really different from its website. It has a different character, I would say. It's more linked to civil society, even if it was, the special website was subsidized and commissioned by the government. Okay, also, as in France, as in the UK, on the website of the mission, the First World War is rarely connected to the Second World War or other historical topics. The number of featured events and projects and their regional distribution is impressive. For instance, on the website of the mission, there is an interactive map which allows search results to be filtered by region. There are entries for regions as well that are far removed from the former front, such as Brittany. The task, or les Outre-mer, the task of the mission and its showcase projects and events relate to the entire period of the Centenaire, so from 2014 to 2018, as is the case in Australia, I guess. With the German initiatives, by contrast, the main emphasis was on the year 2014. Even the small task force created in the German Foreign Ministry to coordinate the subject has now ceased its activities, and I phoned them 3 months ago because I wanted money for them, and they told me no money there anymore. You know, it's funding has ceased, so it's over. For the First World War Centenary in Germany is over. It's 2014, a little bit of 2015, and a little bit, of course, Verdun now. Merkel has to go to Verdun, and for obvious reasons. But that's it. So there is not the stable task force. There is not the stable funding as in other countries. In the French culture of memory, the First World War thus has much greater importance than in the German one. This is obvious. It is significant. Its significance is only comparable to the French Revolution, a comparison that is also occasionally drawn. For instance, the announcement of a conference dedicated to scholarly reflection on the Centenaire thus reads, no, that was Brittany, okay. Judging by the events that it has given rise to, as well as by the distribution of those events across the entire territory, the centennial of the Great War constitute, it would seem, a commemorative occasion on the same level as the bicentennial of the French Revolution in 1989. Though it's explicitly stated that the First World War has the same importance than the French Revolution. Nonetheless, the French case shows similarities with the German case as well, and differences from the British one. While there are also many initiatives for honoring the dead, the emphasis is not placed on their heroism, bravery, or sacrifice for the nation, but their suffering. Therefore, what prevails in this interpretation is not sacrifice, but rather victimhood. That even when the term, or if the term victim or victime in the plural is avoided altogether, but words like suffering, souffrance, is front and center, and this is implicitly is referring to, well, to to victims, to an experience of the war experience which is centered on victimhood, I would say, and not on voluntary sacrifice. This is combined with a clear inclination towards the internationalization of remembrance. In fact, this trend is even stronger here than in Germany. The mission's website, like those of the German federal government and the War Graves Commission, is available in 3 languages. Beyond this, it is even possible to find the category Dans le Monde next to En France on the site's initial landing page, which is, I would say, remarkable. So this is the landing page, and the arrow points to En France, and you see there's also Dans le Monde. These are the basic entries to the website. The aim to also report on projects and initiatives outside of one's own country and to place the memory of the war in an international context is, well, I said this, that's even more evident than on the German website. Okay. Many of the featured French projects and initiatives have an international character in any case. And where the war is ascribed a clear political meaning, the aspects of peace and intercultural understanding tend to predominate. A typical example is how the Paris celebrations were presented for the national holiday on July 14th, 2014, which was devoted entirely to the Centenary. Well, that's Dans le Monde. Oh, this is beautiful, huh? On July 14 in Paris, the former belligerent, countries of the Great War came together to symbolically mark the entry of the centennial of the First World War into the cycle of commemorations and to deliver a universal message of peace and friendship that attests to the reconciliation efforts made a century ago. And on the evening of this day, July 14th, 2014, a grand firework display was held at the Eiffel Tower in which the clear message 1914, paix, guerre, peace, war, was projected on the sky of Paris with what they call lettres pyrotechniques, pyrotechnical letters somehow. Even more emblematic for the internationalization of a remembrance is the memorial in Notre Dame, Lorette, in Notre Dame de Lorette, commissioned by the region of Nord-Pas-de-Calais, which is dedicated to the nearly 600,000 soldiers that fell during the First World War. This memorial was inaugurated by President Hollande on November 11th, 2014. Here, the individual soldiers are honored without specifying their nationalities. This includes more than 173,000 German casualties. This mode of commemoration, or of commemoration, met with considerable resistance in the UK, but was apparently overcome by a decision from the Queen. The exact meaning inscribed into this monument is made abundantly clear by the mission's website. This monument is an object of great aesthetic and symbolic force. It evokes the mass death that struck the battlefields of French Flanders and Artois between 1914 and 1918, while restoring the individual fates of 580,000 men from all over the earth, friends and enemy of the past, reunited now in a posthumous fraternity. Their names will be listed in alphabetical order without distinction as to their nationality, race, or religion. It's probably the first big monument of this kind. And then it goes on by adopting the shape of the ring, a symbol of unity. The architect wanted to emphasize the fraternity that now reigns among the peoples that were the belligerents of the Great War. But by leaving part of the ellipse cantilevered, pronounce it right, above the void. He also wanted to emphasize the fragility of a situation of peace that was unprecedented in the 1,000-year history of the old continent. The Notre Dame de Lorette International Memorial does not celebrate the victors of the Great War. It evokes the suffering shared by all the combatants, as well as the bereavement that affected millions of families. It is also a message of the future addressed at all. A message of the future. It cannot be. It's also a message of the future, to the future, maybe. Addressed at all peoples of the planet, for it shows that war can give way to peace, to a better life for each individual. This is not just a monument. It was inaugurated by the president. It's very expensive. It was financed by partly by the region, partly by the central government, and so on and so forth. And it's highlighted very much on the official website of the Mission Centenary. Besides unambiguously international initiatives, the mission's website also presents numerous Franco-German events and projects, frequently from the area of youth and peace work. And in both countries, the centenary is strongly characterized in terms of the Franco-German friendship. Wherever this relationship is celebrated, the connection to Europe is also usually highlighted. The most important Franco-German commemoration was probably the anniversary of the German declaration of war on France on August 3 at the Alsatian Hartmannswillerkopf, which is a mountain, where the presidents of the two countries made speeches addressed not least at the hundreds of young people from Germany and France who had come to examine the this is a quote, probably it's there, to examine the circumstances that could have led their countries into the First World War and to bear strong witness to Franco-German friendship. They had come with youth projects, so this was organized, of course. And this is the meaning the website ascribes to it. This was part of the, as I said, of a project, and this project was focused on, I quote again, sustaining the conscience of European citizenship. Within the framework of this project, during the 100th anniversary, the start of the war, interdisciplinary workshops were held with young people. These workshops obviously centered on the future of Europe and a post-national understanding of memory and history. They allowed, and this is again a quote, participants to examine the stakes of the transmission of memory on the individual and collective levels, to make them aware of the different approaches to history and to invite them to take the past into account in order to build the Europe of tomorrow. At the memorial service on August 3, 2014, the cornerstone was laid for a joint Franco-German Historial at the Hartmannswillerkopf, which is commended on the mission's website as a highly symbolic gesture in the context of relations between our two countries and that of European construction 100 years after the two nations' entry into the war. Historial is a very special word. It's a word. It's a hybrid word. It's because it's not a memorial. It's not a memorial, but it's not only a museum or an education center. And the French have created this word historial, yeah, to bind those things together. The Historial at the Hartmannswillerkopf is the first, well, I said this. It is scheduled to open on August 2017. And it will first be an architectural gesture expressing the serenity of a site that is at peace today, bearing witness to a common Franco-German destiny after having been a place of devastation and confrontation during the war. It was the most contested front spot in Alsace. However, well, yeah, let me turn to the Battle of Verdun. now, and with that I will finish the French part. The Battle of Verdun is commemorated in a similar fashion. Verdun is accordingly first presented in an article as a French site of memory, whose importance lies in the fact that it was here that the German offensive was halted. This is the first comment on Verdun. And it says, even today, the battlefield of Verdun occupies a special place and constitutes a veritable place of remembrance, lieu de mémoire, for France, a site of pilgrimage for many French families. And then it continues to present it as a German site of memory and a transnational one. A Franco-German battle, Verdun, has also been the scene of reconciliation between former combatants since the interwar period. However, it is the symbolic handshake between François Mitterrand and Helmut Kohl in front of the Douaumont ossuary on September 22nd, 1984 that has entered into the history of the two countries. Today, Verdun is an important destination for German families as well, who represent nearly 40% of the battlefield's visitors. For several years now, there has been a gradual Europeanization of the battlefield and of the memory of Verdun. Yeah. So even tourism is important. That's wanted to indicate with this gesture. What is more, unlike on the British government website, the mission website does not primarily feature commemorative ceremonies, but also countless educational, artistic, touristic, and academic projects, as well as initiatives in the area of cultural heritage. In this way, it also resembles the German websites more than the British one. I should add, however, that these disparities between Britain and the two other countries would certainly need to be relativized a little bit if we were to include the Imperial War Museum in our analysis. So my analysis is a little bit biased here, but it's on the official British website, it's really rituals and ceremonies, whereas on the German and the French one, there are ceremonies, but in terms of numbers, I think projects, youth projects, exhibitions, and even seminars, workshops, academic things are, as a whole, more frequent. A unique aspect of the French website is that it shows how the centenary is observed and reflected on by academics, both at home and abroad, as in an article by Arndt Weinrich from the German Historical Institute in Paris, which deals with the differences between Germany and France. So there is already reflection, already now, it's built in, so to speak, about the centenary on this website. In general, historians and other experts feature much more prominently on the French website than on the websites of the other two countries. Let me summarize. Overall, then, it is possible to observe similarities as well as differences between the ways in which the three governments mark the centenary of the First World War online. As the official websites demonstrate, the First World War still plays a much larger role in the official memory cultures of France and England than in Germany. The former also have much less of a tendency than the latter to place the conflict in the shadow of the Second World War. In France and Britain, moreover, the war is still referred to as the Great War very frequently, not merely as the First World War. The reasons for these differences, especially with regard to France and Germany, are easy to comprehend. The fact that the First World War ended for France in victory and for Germany in defeat continues to play a role. But what is more important maybe, as with the UK, the First World War took a much greater human toll on France than the Second World War, while the reverse holds true for Germany. The ratio is inversed for Germany. It's the Second World War which asked for a much higher toll. Large parts of France were also much more affected by the First World War than the Second World War. It's on French soil that important battlefields and the largest war cemeteries of the First World War are located. For Germany, by contrast, all the earlier fronts of the First World War now lie outside of its borders. This is also the reason why the topic of memorial and battlefield tourism is much more prevalent in France than in Germany. Most importantly, perhaps, the remembrance of the First World War is not especially controversial among the French public, while the Second World War, because of Vichy and the ignominious defeat in 1914, remains an unpleasant memory. In Germany, it's precisely because of the unprecedented nature of the German crimes that the Second World War and the Holocaust have virtually attained the status of a founding myth for the Federal Republic and the nation, I would say. Although unquestionably negative, it has nevertheless also made it possible to accentuate the positive development of Germany since 1945. So the narrative basically is, yeah, our nation has been responsible for the worst crimes in history and the 2 world wars. This is also the reason why Germans have no problems, or the mainstream has no problem to acknowledge main responsibility for the First World War as well, even if it's maybe not completely true. Because, you know, we're responsible for the Second World War anyway, so where's the point of negating, to deny that we might have been responsible, we as a nation might have been responsible for the First World War as well, you know. It's a famous joke is always take 2 by 1. No, buy 2, pay 1. No. Anyway, so, and then the narrative continues, but Germany is the nation which has learned probably most of these wars. And at least it has learned its lesson, and we are now completely different. That's, of course, the message. Yeah? So the negativity of the historical experience or the past can be instrumentalized for the positivity of the present. The Second World War and the Holocaust, therefore, are not only much more important for the German national identity than the First World War, they strongly overshadow it. Even the Centenary has changed nothing in this regard, I would say. There has been interest in it, but it was short, it was short. It was a short phase, and we now proceed to other themes. But there are also strong similarities between, those were the similarities between France and Britain, different with regard to Germany, and there are also, as I have tried to show, similarities between France and Germany. It is against this backdrop that the UK appears as a rather special case in Europe. Most remarkable is the fact that the British government puts less emphasis on a post-national culture of memory that is based on peace and European integration than France and Germany. One factor here, no doubt, is the strong connection to the former colonies outside of Europe within the context of the Commonwealth, but even more important maybe is maybe even greater role is played by the conservative orientation of the government and its Eurosceptic stance in light of the current debate over the country's possible exit from the European Union. Thank you very much for your attention. That's it.
Thanks to Professor Yates for that very interesting talk. We've got about 15 minutes for questions, and so I'm the chair. That's if anyone has a question, please raise your hand, and Professor Yates will be happy to answer it. Peter Stanley.
Well, thanks, Professor. That was very illuminating indeed. I'm Peter Stanley from UNSW Canberra. How do we apply to historical refugee status with Germany? That's my first question. The second question is, you've talked
sorry,
about,
I didn't.
I'm sorry.
The refugee status?
Yes, that was a joke, don't worry.
Oh.
You spoke about the relationship between the European project and the three nations.
Mm-hmm.
What about the centre? What about the European response in terms of European communities' recognition of the centenary of the Great War? Has it had any formal acknowledgement of the conflict?
The EU, Brussels, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me say, I'm at the beginning of this project, and this is the first very superficial tour d'horizon, and I haven't. Do you know, Martin, where the?
Not on the online world, but in late June 2014 there was a commemorative meeting in Ypres in Belgium by the European Union, and they unveiled a bench of peace where you can sit down and enjoy peace, so to say. For example, and so Federal Chancellor Merkel was there, as well the other heads of state of the European Union. The President of the European Union, Schulz, who's an historically interested person per se, was very much in favor of having as a topic for the European Union. But, well, the European Union is consisting of many different states, and even although many are entangled with the First World War, the approach is very different. Take, for example, the case of Hungary, which in its current constitution has in its preamble been written that they reject the Treaty of Trianon, which dates back to 1920, one of the peace treaties of the First World War. So there was no way for the time being that there would be one voice within the European Union, as often a time, to say, well, this is one thing to remember in this way. And so, yeah, it works with this kind of bench of peace, meeting together and saying, yeah, that thing happens, now it's getting better, but yeah, that's it.
But probably your question about refugees, I take it not as a joke.
No,
if it comes to immigrants, it's interesting that UK can use the topic for the integration of especially Muslim immigrants. Germany has not done anything in that sense. It would have been probably not easy, but possible to use the First World War as a means to strengthen the integration of Turkish immigrants in some way, or to enter into some kind of discourse over history with them. Maybe, I mean, in Berlin, for instance, there are many schools or many classes mainly consists of Turkish, of immigrants of Turkish origin. So, and there's a shared history as far as the First World War is concerned, and it's also a shared history in the sense that in both cases, we're talking about a genocide and about guilt, which of course, well, yeah, we all know that the Turkish government has problems with this, and also the Turkish community in Germany certainly divided over this. But this would have been an opportunity to tackle a very tricky question, but the government has completely avoided this.
With regard to Belgium, alongside France, there is an enormous German cemetery at Langemark, which contains, in Belgium, which contains some 10,000 graves of German troops. That battle happened in October 1914. There's always been a fraught relationship between Belgium and Germany. Has Germany done anything apart from maintaining that site to improve relations with the Belgians? Because I know that the Belgians had this very fraught relationship with Germany in the past.
Well, that's a good question. I have highlighted very much the Franco-German projects, and there are also German-Belgian projects for the Centenary, but not of course, on the scale of Franco-German relations. I mean, I can't think of anything in particular now, but there are, especially, and this is maybe not here. Region comes in. I mean, Germany is it's a federal state, yeah, and not as in France. The difference between the regions are very strong when it comes to the First World War. Romania has done probably most projects than any other German region for the Centenary, and this is the border region with Belgium, of course. And I know that there have been many, on a regional basis, many projects with Belgium. Yeah. But I don't think Langemark has been highlighted because this is a myth, as you know, of course, in German history. It's the myth of the young German students, which it's the myth of nationalist myth of sacrifice in the nationalist tradition. The myth goes that they all went into the fire singing Deutschland, Deutschland über alles, and they were all students of the best, the cream of their generations. It's the lost generation myth. Yeah, don't think the German government highlighted that.
David Stevenson, Honest History website. Professor, one of the big things in Australia is corporate donations, $90 million plus from private sector business corporations. Is there anything like that in Germany or France or Britain?
Donations to commemorate?
Yeah, commemorative donations from BHP, for example, in Australia, those sorts of companies.
Not that I can think of.
Indirectly, in a way that there's not private companies, but private ventures, private association foundations who went into that. For example, Volkswagen Foundation, which is, well, of course, connected to the Volkswagen company. They've supported a few doctoral thesis conferences. There will be a conference later this year about
but that's on an academic level.
Classic kind of money giving to whatever.
$10 million to build a monument or something like that.
Not in Germany or not in France that I would be aware of. In Britain, there was contributions via the Royal British Legion, which is one of the biggest charities in the UK, and which of course is very much interconnected with the commemoration of the First World War.
This is, by the way, it's Martin Bayer, who has done a survey on the way the more than how many countries? 100. Would commemorate the Great War, but before the Centenary. So it's a survey on what was planned and programmed and announced for the German, well, in a way for the German government. Yeah, but it was never published because German government didn't want to see in public that other countries do so much more. Is that right? Or
well, it has been put confidential, and my direct contractor was the Institute for Foreign Cultural Relations, and that was being put in contract with the German Foreign Office, and they're still working on it. Maybe in 2017 or 18 we can publish this kind of study, so we still see there's a couple of relevance. Because it's not just about the plans, but also about how each individual country, First World War and its commemoration, plays a role. What's the important issues, what's the sensitive issues, what's the black holes in memory, so to say. And so we're still working on it to a certain extent. Of course, I can give you this study and then I could kill you. But,
does it cover how much they're spending?
Second?
Does it cover how much the different countries are spending?
It wasn't known for most of the countries so far. For example, back then I wrote it in mid-2013 to early 2014. it was already quite clear that countries such as Belgium, France, UK, and of course Australia will put quite an amount into it. But for example, the amount, now it's clearly visible in Australia, it wasn't clear back then. I had figured something of between 250 and maybe 300 million Australian dollars. Now it's much more, so it wasn't clear, of course, back then. For example, the German special budget from the German Foreign Office and the federal budget is 3.5 million euros, which is 5.1 million Australian dollars. But as you already mentioned, Professor Jans, Germany is a very federal state, and so when it comes to cultural matters, it's very much based on the federal states, when we have 16 of them, so it's very difficult to compare and to count in this respect.
Yeah, but I'm sure it will.
Of course,
I'm sure if you take everything together, it's not more than 20 million euros or 30 million Australian dollars or something like this. So between Australia and Germany, it's like it's kind of compared.
Population difference.
Yeah, with slightly more people.
Yeah.
I've got a quick question here.
Quick question. Australia tends to be a very secular country, but our commemorations are almost a quasi-religious experience. It seems to fill a void or a hole. It doesn't fill as well. I'm not sure of the German situation as far as that goes. Could this be why Germany is not so passionate about the commemoration? That have this hole that needs to be filled.
No, because when it comes to the Second World War, it's the Second World War is front and center in many ways in public memory culture, and here the confessional divide is no problem, and so that the answer is clearly no. That's not the problem. That's not the problem.
Last question, Joe.
Thank you. Firstly, a comment about sacrifice. As you were talking about sacrifice as being a voluntary act, which I agree is often interpreted as, I was reminded of Bouguereau's famous poem about Abraham and Isaac, which you may know, where the old man kills his son and half the sea of Europe one by one. So in that sense, sacrifice can also carry the connotation of authority sacrificing the young man as in religious
against their will, but but then it's the collective, the society, or the can you say the collective, the collective sacrificing whatever, a lamb, or
and it's still active. I agree.
It's still active. It's not the young man who. The sacrifice who does it voluntarily, the sacrifice. So, yeah, of course, this is an anthropological mechanism.
I just have a quick question. What fascinates me is what are we going to do with all the objects, material culture, the websites that have been created for the Centenary? When 2018 comes, will there be a political will certainly to dismantle these? But all of these museums that have been created are not going to have enough visitors. We're now going to have new memorials, new museums, Joshua the French and Belgian landscapes.
Yeah.
And it'll be very interesting to see what happens to them.
Oh, you mean, now you're referring, for instance, to the place in Alsatia,
Yes.
for instance, or...
So you've got the new museum at Toulon, you've got the Baron,
Is the Monash Centre coming?
the sheep.
Yeah, it will be
all the debris of
cathedrals in the desert.
It's going to be vast. I'm just intrigued as to what's going to happen to them.
I don't know. It's certainly a problem Germany doesn't have, because we don't have these places. we have outsourced it. In the heart of Villacott is a German-Franco collaboration. So well, yes, I mean, school children will be carried there, you know, involuntarily. It's a sacrifice.
So we now know the legacy of the First World War is a bunch of recalcitrant students being put on a bus. Well, thank you all for coming out on a cool evening tonight, and wish you all to join with me and thank you for listening in.
Thank you.